As we near the end of the year, I was feeling the urge to bring out my largest watercolor sketchbook to return to this slightly neglected medium with a portrait or two inspired by Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Then it escalated. Let's start at the beginning. I got a new set of watercolors I'd been itching to try out, as the brand behind these also makes my favorite acrylic paints that I've been using for years. As I love painting portraits, this particular set, curated by the amazing Ali Kavanaugh, caught my eye. The 6 colors in here really do look promising when it comes to painting a wide variety of skin tones and portraits under different lighting. We have some complementary color pairs to mix neutrals, an overall warm-leaning selection with 2 cooler paints for balance, and we go from very light to a dark Payne's Gray. The packaging was a really positive surprise, as well as I love the very lightweight case with round palette indents. The set also comes with a surprisingly detailed guide on how to mix these paints, and I'm really interested to give these suggestions a try later after I've done my own experiments. My first impressions when swatching were very positive. The yellow is very intense and might easily overwhelm a color mix if I'm not careful, but it also applies beautifully transparent, so might be ideal for glazing and capturing the brightest sunlight. Similarly, the pyrrole orange feels overwhelming in its intensity if slightly less transparent. I'm curious to see how this will combine with the not quite complementary color ultramarine turquoise. The dark red, Pearline crimson, will play off these more luminous shades nicely, I hope, and looks like a grounding color after that orange and yellow. Sap green will be perfect for olive undertones and neutralizing all the reddish colors, while the ultramarine turquoise, the paint that I was most excited about, is at a really interesting spot between leaning green and leaning blue. The Payne's Gray might look the least exciting, but this will bring in truly dark shadows where needed, and from experience I love mixing Payne's Gray with other colors for neutrals. Let's just dive in with some rough figure sketches to color later. These sketches feel very dynamic, alive, and under all these scribbly lines there's a lot of detailed observation. If you're thinking, Evie, these look a little different from your usual sketches, then you're right. I got obsessed with these more dynamic figure drawings and trying to capture movement after following a class on Craftsy, who is the sponsor of this video. While I've been watching a lot of classes on Craftsy all about art, especially for watercolors and focused on different methods of color mixing, it's the class Sketching People in Motion by Mark Taro Holmes that had me fill sketchbook page over sketchbook page. His approach to sketching is completely different from my own, and so all the more infectious and inspiring. That spark of inspiration is what always brings me back to classes. Craftsy is an online resource and community with over 2,000 classes in more than 20 categories, from crochet to calligraphy and of course drawing and painting. I've been enjoying all the sketchbook-themed classes here with essential techniques for sketching the energy of places and sketching people in motion, leaving a deep impression. Sketching people in motion goes from capturing gestures to material recommendations, from ink to color, and from beginner-friendly to more advanced techniques. I'm learning to be more intuitive, quick, and loose in my sketches, so this was the perfect fit. And I can't wait to dive into Mark Taro Holmes' Travel Sketching in Mixed Media class as well. But no matter if you're here to fill your sketchbooks or if you want to learn more about delicate botanical art in watercolors, Flemish master painting techniques, or improving your painting compositions, there's a Craftsy class to fit any interest. First 1,000 people watching this video to use the link in my description will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49, valid for new members only. And let me know which classes make it into your sketchbooks or creative projects. I'm really obsessed with this very loose yet observant way of sketching. There's no pencil sketch underneath, just the flow of lines and scribbly details. If I mess up a foot or hand, I'll just have to draw a second foot or second hand right next to it, correcting the placement. To really capture motion, the reference is important. I of course couldn't have Mia Goth move around in my studio, but instead I used short GIFs of these movie scenes, and from the trailer. Seeing the motion on a loop helped me observe them in much more detail. The annoyed flick of a wrist, a slowly spreading smile, the movement of hair as a character walks downstairs. The class also made me treat each sketchbook spread as a composition. In the case of this stray Nosferatu sketch that made it into this otherwise Frankenstein-themed sketchbook session, that shows itself as arms moving in the span of this single sketch. Or in this sketch here, it's the diagonal movement of the creature, Adam, as he sits or rather plops onto the ground. This is where watercolors finally got to come into play. Instead of full color studies, here I wanted to get a first impression and use them to emphasize parts of my sketchbook spreads. So the colors are supposed to reinforce the composition and guide your eyes across the pages. For the largest sketchbook spread in my A5 sketchbook, I picked a focus for each scene represented on these pages. As you can maybe see, the concept that I stumbled upon while sketching was stairs. That created a natural rhythm across the page. Elizabeth walking downwards and off the sketchbook page. Victor looking after her, looming above. Then it transitions into the lofty stairwell of his childhood home, and with his mother, the same actress as Elizabeth of course, framing the page and, as we follow her gaze to the left, leading us back into the entangled mess of it. That sense of constant movement was what I tried to capture. I usually really struggle with movement, so this was a big challenge, and I really enjoyed what it brought to my usually kind of stiff sketchbook practice. The watercolors emphasize faces and key colors. A red veil, warm candlelight, or even a trail of blood on a dress. Already, I really like these 6 paints and what they can mix. I'm not restricted to portraiture, but can go and fill my sketchbook with anything. They also spread smoothly on this mixed media paper, which I was a bit worried about at first. Then the true way of these pages, as we can follow the creature Adam carrying Elizabeth down those stairs one last time. We are onlookers, part of that crowd hinted at in the scribbliest of details. But now that I'm all warmed up and have gotten a first impression, let's take a closer look. By painting a color constellation. It's my new favorite way to make color mixing charts, and here it was an interesting challenge to fill out the constellation with just 6 paints. On these charts I always include the paint name, as well as pigment numbers and names, kind of clustered around each color swatch. No matter how much I think that I'll just remember these, after a few weeks or even months, I'll have no clue which paint is which pigments, so in the end, this always comes in handy. We have a few single pigment paints here as well as mixes for a nice balance overall. I arranged them in a vaguely color wheel inspired formation and then started building my connections of color gradients. This gives me a general overview but also a feel for which paint might be more intense and overwhelm others in a color mix. And I also kept my eyes open for all those skin tones I could mix here. So maybe that's a great moment to talk about skin tones. I probably never will post any kind of how I mix skin colors tutorial because it's just so varied and I often end up painting people under colorful lighting for my fantasy or sci-fi illustrations, so the combinations are endless. When I paint with acrylics recently, I most often reach for alizarin crimson, viridian green and then a variety of earth tones to mix with those. But I've also had a phase of using just burnt sienna and ultramarine blue for portraits, so really there's no specific baseline I always return to. So what am I looking for here? Complementary colors, transparency but also build up into dark shades, and gray tones. The inclusion of turquoise, which I could use like my beloved viridian hue, and perylene crimson, warmer than alizarin crimson but still a good option, makes that part of this palette feel comforting and familiar. All the complementary color options in this set make it easy to mix muted tones, to create desaturated browns and ochres. For more dramatic shadows, there's the Payne's Gray as a base, which we can then warm up or turn into a cool blue. And the sap green is perfect for warm olive undertones. Nickel, azo yellow and pyrrole orange are the most intense and vibrant and both give the impression of great glazing options. The perylene crimson is a unique, interesting choice for a red. A more classic palette would maybe include a magenta-leaning red to balance out the orange, but the perylene maroon pigment leans decidedly warm and brownish. We can still create cooler tones by mixing with the ultramarine turquoise, and this gives the palette a distinct character, which I find really important when buying curated sets. After I'd painted all my branching gradients, I still had some room left and decided to add mixing tests with a focus on darkness. Lots of pigment, very little water to see how far I can push saturation and value. In portraits, capturing shadow shapes is especially important. Pyrrole orange really is a powerhouse when it comes to saturation, very luminous and eye-catching. For a softer, more burnt sienna-leaning orange, mixing the nickel azo yellow with the perylene crimson is a better option. And while I haven't really mentioned the green yet that much, it's a gorgeous mixed pigment paint and creates these beautiful deep shadows with the perylene crimson. Now, what's special about core paints? These use a binder called aquazole, which has been used in art conservation since early 1990, there as an in-painting medium. For these watercolors, it's supposed to hold a much greater amount of pigment than gum arabic for especially vibrant and luminous paints. Core Artist watercolors are a part of Golden Artist Colors, and I love their acrylic paints and mediums. Have been using those for quite a few years at this point, and so I was incredibly curious about what they could bring to watercolors. The acrylic painter in me wants to give their watercolor ground and different mediums a try as well. I always find the mixing of paints and mediums to create the perfect texture and consistency for my personal painting style fascinating. These feel both very delicate yet powerful, looking luminous even after a single very transparent layer. And observing them flow in these small wet-on-wet tests felt nearly meditative. These aren't granulating paints, but they create beautiful flowing patterns. And paint can easily be lifted with a wet brush. I completed my color testing with more 2 to 3 paint mixes here, finding ochres, grays and soft greens to use in my sketchbook. We return again to Frankenstein. I'm sketching a scene from the first workshop in which Victor Frankenstein is getting down to some questionable science. Again, I used a GIF as reference to capture movement, but this time I gave myself a quick colored pencil sketch to capture the overall composition. A quick shout out to the ChromaFlow pencils. I only have a few shades, but they are very subtle and I constantly reach for them when sketching anything that will then be painted over with transparent media. After so many months of focusing on gouache in my sketches, it feels strange to be in the realm of watercolor paints again. Suddenly, I have to remember to leave light areas blank with no titanium white to come to the rescue later. I used the nickel azo yellow to hint at the overall warm, sunlit room. All my color tests for shades of beige and brown now come in handy, and I quickly build up the fuzzy details in half-lit areas. But then, to force myself to not waffle about too much, I immediately went ahead to paint Elizabeth's silhouette. In her red and black dress, she'll be the biggest value contrast in this scene, framed by another window behind her head. The Payne's Grey is beautiful on its own, and I then mixed it with Perylene Crimson both on the palette, but mostly on the sketchbook page itself, to create the red pattern of her dress. Pure Perylene Crimson only shows up in the center of the image, where the body is presented. Everything else I'll keep as a color mix to make that saturation stand out. Now, you might wonder, why bother with this scene study? Especially as I keep on going, adding more detail, deepening shadows, it might seem like a lot of effort. But Guillermo del Toro and his entire team, from costume designers to cinematographers, are masters of their craft, and there's so much to learn here that I only discovered while painting. letting my eyes wander and take in each area at the same speed as my brush. That window framing Miyagov's head, for example. The sharp lines surrounding the body on the table guiding our eyes. The textures of knickknacks and books and even a skeleton bordering the scene, keeping our eyes boxed in, like in a cage, on the simple center. The play of light through the largest window and how Victor Frankenstein's expression is cast in shadow. My reference was in constant motion, which made it even more clear how intentional all these composition choices are. This wasn't just an accidental lucky screen grab. Even with the movement, the framing and guiding and lighting remains the same. Just looking at a scene, at a painting or an illustration doesn't give me the same insight or appreciation of all these thoughtful details as actually painting it does. In the end, I love how this tiny study turned out so much. These paints were perfect for this very layer-focused approach with the yellow of the first layer still shining through, and I could so easily hint at details with just a subtle brush stroke here or there. The paints also captured the warm sunlight in this scene really well, with the overall warm tone to the palette. So while this is a portrait set, I think it also works wonderfully for other subjects. Let's paint an actual portrait. Though even this turned into more of a scene with a figure rather than a close-up on a face. The costuming in this movie is just too beautiful and inventive to focus only on portraiture. I still use the moving reference here, so instead of trying to capture an exact likeness, I went for an overall mood with larger color washes in the beginning. Again, I had to stop myself from painting over the lightest areas, the acrylic painter in conflict with this very transparent medium. The acrylic painter in me also wants to call this slow approach carving out details or shapes, but for the much softer medium of watercolors, that's too harsh a word. Instead, this feels like looking through a blurry camera lens and very slowly adjusting the focus until we've found some sharpness and detail. My moving reference kept me away from adding too much detail, and instead, like for the previous scene, made me latch onto all those composition choices that remained consistent even through movement. How her head is framed by light, and her amazing feathery headpiece, of course. One side of her face is in shadow, but the red curtain behind her still lit and providing a contrast. The skull is an excellent example of this light-dark contrast overall. The lit side of the skull is surrounded by the darkest shadows of that red curtain, but the side of that skull that is cast in shadow then again contrasts with the lighter areas of the background, a constant back and forth. Instead of just wanting to paint a beautiful portrait or even capturing a likeness, I wanted to dig into those discoveries, layer by layer. The lighting in the movie, even divorced from color, is a thing to behold. This also turned out to be an amazing stress test for these paints and the watercolor paper of my Hanemüde sketchbook. I found that I can layer nearly endlessly, glaze and then lift paint with a clean brush, and the paints kept their luminosity and mixed beautifully. For a sketchbook paper, this held up incredibly well, especially keeping in mind that there's no taping or stretching of paper here. I'd been hesitant about that part, but this 100% cotton paper could probably handle some larger wet-on-wet paintings as well. I tried to keep my brushwork both soft and a bit playful, with these blobs of colors to hint at ruffles and folds on her dress, or flowers in the background. Only her face gets a bit more of a realistic approach. I challenged myself to keep the shadow side of her face quite blurry. I often overdo the details there. I think I could have stopped even earlier during the painting process for a more abstract version, but I really need the practice. By the way, I ended up using all of these 6 paints nearly equally. The yellow really turned out to be amazing for glazing, as it's staining and transparent, and the sap green created beautiful warm shadows for the background. The paint's grey has enough color in it to not make any mixes with it look muddy, just a very delicate dark tone. I ended up looking at some of the color swatches on the Golden Artist Colors website. Give them a look, their core watercolor swatches are really beautiful. Especially the ultramarine turquoise shows both pigments very clearly. I ended up liking these studies so much that I turned them into December's Patreon print with the small movie scene study on the back of this square large postcard. At the very end, I wanted to paint Frankenstein's monster, as he calls him, to explore the darker side of this paint set. Here I used mixes of Payne's grey with crimson and sap green, and the mottled texture of his skin and the scars gave me room to explore different undertones as well. I'm really happy with the little white paper area that I left blank around the left eye, giving that shiny, sad look. While I'm no portrait painter and definitely no watercolor expert, I hope that my experiments and scene studies here gave you a good overview of how these paints mix, layer and blend. I love the unique choices in this set, especially Perylene Crimson as a much browner red tone than what I would instinctually reach for, and the beautiful ultramarine turquoise. And I think these will be amazing for practicing portraits and beyond. I seem to always return to watercolors over winter and spring, so I hope to show you many more sketchbook pages filled with these. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the new year with new art videos.